this going here. One of the things I wanted to do was just bring up some of the diagram of the heart anatomy that we have from lecture. So, like this one that we see here, posterior, and then we're going to look inside of it as well. So remember that just in general, when we're looking at the heart, very basics, we got the base of the heart up here, we got the apex of the heart down here. The base is where all these different blood vessels are exiting and entering. Remember that all arteries go away from the heart, all veins come back to the heart. Now there is this trend where arteries tend to be red and veins tend to be blue, but that's not always the case. Remember with the pulmonary circulation where we see the blood vessels going across this way to and from the lungs, those have the opposite coloration, right? These here are the pulmonary arteries because they're taking blood away from the heart, but it necessarily is deoxygenated blood. That's the whole reason it's going next door to the lungs, to pick up a fresh load of oxygen, to get rid of carbon dioxide, and then come back to the heart. So these red vessels that you see here and here, those are pulmonary veins taking this freshly oxygenated blood, as red as it's ever going to get, dumping it into that left atrium, so left atrium can send it down to the left ventricle can send it out through the aorta and distribute it to the body, okay? So definitely we need to know major blood vessels, chambers, etc. We also need to know this coronary circulation. So that means a set of arteries and veins that supply the heart itself with the blood that it needs to survive as an organ, right? So we've got, for instance, the right coronary artery. There's going to be a left coronary artery that also comes off of the arch of the aorta, or more correctly off of the ascending aorta, but it is hidden underneath the pulmonary trunk. So it comes across here, and then it actually, here, I can do a little drawing, if you will, I think. Can you draw for me? No. It's going to end up snaking across, and then it branches really, really quickly into the anterior interventricular artery, or the branch, and then the circumflex as it goes across there. So there are a set of small blood vessels that we need to know, both arteries and veins that feed the heart itself. Now we won't do any of those on the sheep hearts or the pig hearts or whatever. They're too small, it's too difficult to tell the difference. We're just doing big things instead. Okay, so in terms of internal anatomy of the heart, we will keep this one up right here, because this is really the view that we're going to be getting when we do the heart dissection. And in terms of the heart dissection, the simplest way to do it is to start at the apex of the heart and then make a coronal cut like you see here that's going to work its way up towards the base of the heart at the top. I don't know why that doesn't want to do a pointer for me. It'd be so pleasant if it would. But in any case, it's good. So that way, if we do a coronal section, it's going to give us a view that is similar to what we see in the book and like you see here in the PowerPoint. Okay. Now these vessels, like the pulmonary trunk, etc., are on the very anterior surface of the heart. So oftentimes when you're doing this coronal section, you may be deep to these, so you might not get a good view of the pulmonary valve, but you should get a good view through the left side of the heart with the left atrium, left ventricle, and even the aortic valve. And then you should be able to see the right ventricle, and then if you follow it up, get up to the right atrium. Now, again, when we said we're talking about the dissections, they're just going to be all like tan and brown and things like that. So figuring out what you're looking at is a little bit more difficult. And when you first open it up, what you're going to find is, when you open that up, you're going to look for the asymmetrical wall of the ventricle. Notice that even in the diagram here, the left side has a much thicker wall compared to the right side, because the left side, the left ventricle, has to send it out to the body, whereas the right ventricle just has to send it next door to the lungs. So you use the thickness of the ventricular wall to go, oh, I see, that's the left side, that's the right side after you open it up. Once you figure out which is left and right, left is going to have the thicker wall, then you start working your way from there. I got the ventricles, that means those are the left and the right atrioventricular valves. I work my way superior, that's the left and the right atrium, etc. Okay? Okay, so let's take a look at the model itself. So I just have to jump out of our display mode here. Jump back to something like this. Okay. So what we find is, if I can get that a little bit bigger. If I can get that bigger. All right, so with that heart that we see here, we're going to be looking at the same things where, again, we're looking at, hold on. Now the weird thing about this is it's actually a little bit upside down, so that's why I have to be on this side. We're going to be identifying the different main vessels. You're going to identify the individual blood vessels, again, like the right coronary artery that we see here between the right atrium and the right ventricle, and the different branches of the left. You're going to be looking on the inside. You're going to be identifying the different chambers. You're going to identify the different valves. Remember, we also have those muscular ridges. We have the trabeculae carnae down here in the ventricles. We also have these ridges in the atria, which are going to be the pectinate muscles. Okay, so those are usually better seen when we look at the, if you will, the front cover like that. Okay. There are some specialized things that we are identifying there as well. Remember, this is the fossa-valgus, that little indentation in the wall between the right atrium and the left atrium. There's a little dark spot here, which is the opening for the coronary sinus. Remember, the coronary sinus is back here on the posterior side of the heart. It's this area where all of the venous blood is going to aggregate before it dumps into that right atrium. So you've got the middle cardiac vein that comes up between the ventricles. You've got a great cardiac vein that's curving around here on the left side, and they're all dumping in right into here, which is what we call the coronary sinus, right in there. Okay? Okay. So let's take a look at something that is real instead. The reason that I'm trying to use the display like this is I'm trying to create another video like we have for the Panopto so that maybe you can review this later on. This is the first one that we're shooting in the lab though. So you should be able to, in the recording, you should be able to see the picture from the PowerPoint over on the right side, and you should be able to see the video on the left side. And with any of those videos, when it has the camera capture on the left side there, I think in the recording you can actually click on it and expand it. So if you want to view that exclusively, you can, which will be important when we're looking at the dissection ones here. So that way you can get a better shot at it than that little view that you're getting right now. Okay. So, for instance, here is one of our cheek parts. Okay? So again, when we look at the surface of it, it's just going to be brown and white. This is going to be pericardial fat. The white that you see through here, we can see the apex of the heart. The base of the heart is going to be up at the top. You can see these ear-like flaps, which are the auricle. And you can, at times, see some of the different blood vessels. Now, for the most part, on the dissections, we're not asking you major blood vessels, but it is interesting to be able to try to find them if you navigate your way around, start at those ventricles, and kind of work your way up and back to them. So if we look inside the heart, right, here we see two long chambers. So you can see this one over here on the right side, at least on the viewing angle, what we have is a thin wall, and over here we have a thick wall. So in truth, this is the left ventricle through here, and this is the right ventricle over here instead. And we can tell because of that wall. So things that we can identify in the dissection, like we said, we could do layers. So we could point to the surface of the heart here and say what that layer is, the epicardium. You would then point to the middle of the wall, anywhere along here, and we said name the layer, it would be myocardium. And then if we pointed inside the chamber, that would be endocardium instead. So we've got our left ventricle over there, we've got our right ventricle over here, and since we know this is the left ventricle, here we start seeing chordae tendineae, the heartstrings. Wherever they attach to the wall, and you see that big muscular ridge like here and there, those are papillary muscles. Okay? If you have muscular ridges, you have to kind of take a look. If you have other muscular ridges, oh, wait for it. Oh, there it is. If you have other muscular ridges that are not attached to chordae tendineae, those are going to be trabeculae carnae instead. Okay? These ones that you see down here. All right, so that means this is the left atrioventricular valve, right? Because we know this is the left side. That means this is the left atrium up here. So we're just using that to navigate and see what we're able to identify. So left atrium, left AV valve, left ventricle. The blood comes in this way, and it actually goes out this way in a V-shaped pattern. That's very interesting. So it's called the ventricle. Doesn't have any influence, just coincidence, but still. So V-shaped pattern comes in this way, goes up through this way, and notice it's going to pass through along here. This, what I'm picking up right here, there's a little membrane, or what it looks like a membrane right through here. Okay? this right here is the aortic valve. So when we're exiting that left ventricle, it's going to pass through the aortic valve. It's going to go up into the aorta, and then that's going to curve around and go out to the body. So remember that our semilunar valves don't have any chordae tendineae attached to them. Only the atrioventricular valves, like you see there. So this flap right here and right here, these are going to be parts of the aortic valve, and this is going to be the aorta up there. For the right side, again, right ventricle, we can see very clearly. You can actually see what's called a moderator band right here, which helps to make sure that that right ventricle doesn't distend too much when it fills. But in order to see the right atrium, etc., and the right AV valve, you really have to follow it around and work your way up to it. It kind of curves around, so it's much harder to see. So oftentimes we can't see the right atrium, and we can't see the pulmonary trunk and the pulmonary valve. Okay, any other things we can see? In the middle here, we can see the interventricular septum. So this is the dividing line between the two halves of the ventricle. Other things that we have, we do have a few hearts that actually have a pericardial sac still attached to them. So, out of the way, here's one that has a pericardial sac still attached to it. So it's right here. It's this connective tissue bag, like you see here, that I'm peeling back. Okay? So this is the fibrous pericardium, or the pericardial sac. So if you got it on the lab practical, it would look just like that, peeled back like that, and it'd say name is bag or sac or something. Okay? Now, in terms of membranes, remember, if we point to the surface of the heart and we say name the membrane, we would call it the visceral pericardium. Visceral means guts. So it's going to be right on the surface of the organ. If we were to point to the inside of the bag, in here and say name the membrane, that's where the parietal pericardium is going to be located. That way, when the heart's in its bag and it's moving around, etc., it's not generating any friction. We've got two serous slippery membranes that are going against each other that allows it to move very easily. So serous membranes, both of them, parietal pericardium here, visceral pericardium over there. Okay? I need a background that's more white that has more contrast with my purple gloves. But that's our pericardial sac. So if you were to see that on lab practical, it would look like that. Okay. What other goodies do we have here? This one is a bit bigger still. Okay. So again, you can see some of our interventricular vessels on the surface here. Now, we can't really tell right off the bat whether this is the front or the back, anterior or posterior. But when we look inside, now we're figuring, okay, here's the thick side. So what ventricle is this? It's the thick wall. That's the left ventricle over here. That's the right ventricle over here. So if that's the right here, and that's the left, this is actually the posterior of the heart. So we're viewing it anatomically right now. Okay? That means this is the posterior. This is going to be either the posterior interventricular artery, likely, or it could be that middle cardiac vein. But it's likely the artery right there. So again, we use the orientation inside to figure out what we're seeing outside, as well as other parts. So here's some trabeculae carneae. There's some very good papillary muscles there and there. Okay? Here are some good chordae tendineae leading up to that atrioventricular valve that goes up into the left atrium. Right ventricle over there. This one you can actually see. Here's the right atrioventricular valve with the chordae tendineae attached to a papillary muscle there and there. Here's part of the valve here too. And then in terms of exiting, this right here, over on the side, blood comes in this way, goes out in a V-shaped pattern, goes up over here. So this is going to be the aortic valve up here. It's kind of hard to see because it's way up here, but it's going to, my pointer here is extending up towards it. So that's going to be going up, 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 up. Ooh, there we go. See, it's coming up out of one of those branches of the arch of the aorta. Okay? So when you're doing the dissection, you could do that as well. Use your probe or your finger or whatever to follow some of these pathways so that you can figure out kind of what you're seeing. Okay? So any questions on what we're seeing with some of the preserved specimens so far? So again, big things we're seeing in the dissection. Chambers, valves, chordae tendineae, trabeculae carneae, layers, and membranes are the main things. All right. So let me do a little shift here. Oh, that is the cow heart. It's so very big, the camera doesn't even know what to do with it. It's like, wow, I can't even imagine what that looks like. All right, so, you know, cows have those big brown eyes. They're so sweet looking. You can see they have really big hearts. Right in time for Valentine's Day. If you want one of these for your boyfriend or girlfriend, you can run over to the butcher and say, oh, look, I heart you, honey. There you go. All right, so same type of thing. You can see, at least a little bit, it's got the same type of organization to it. We can see that V-shaped pattern to it, apex down there, base up here. You can see an auricle up here, the ear-like flap. We can definitely see some blood vessels, but look how much more pliable it is, okay? While it's a little bit gross because it's squishy, it's more true to what the actual structure needs to be. We need these things to be able to expand like a balloon to accommodate blood when they're filling, and then go through an elastic recoil when they're emptying, okay? Chambers as well as arteries. Arteries we find have a lot of elastic fibers in their wall so that they can distend and then go back to their original size. So if we look inside, oh, it's like opening a big mouth. So you can see the same. So here's a big thick wall here. So this is all left ventricle over here, okay? Right ventricle is going to be along this side over here, much thinner. And look at these chordae tendineae right there. Talk about heartstrings. Those are some really hard heartstrings right there. You can see them attaching to the papillary muscles along the wall there. You can see some of the trabeculae carnae as well, the other ridges. In terms of working its way through, it actually passes over this way here. On the left side, this, and I'll put my finger in it, underneath it, but this is going to be the semilunar valve. Now the semilunar valve, there, see how my fingers, it's a little bit hard to see on the small screen there. My finger's underneath one of the cusps of the aortic valve. So again, these cusps are like shaped like an umbrella, perfect for today with all the wind and stuff like that. When the wind gets underneath your umbrella, it tends to move it. When the blood tries to come back into a chamber, it catches in these umbrella-shaped cusps and pulls them down and closes the valve so that the blood can't come back into that chamber. So the shape of these is what allows those valves to actually move and do their function of creating a one-way movement through the heart. Okay? Okay. So, again, just more demonstrative for the big cow heart here. Another unique aspect of this one, though, again, we see some of the major blood vessels here. Here is a section of the trachea going into the bronchi. This white ring that you see right here, that's a hyaline cartilage ring that's holding open this air tube. And you can see how it branches into multiple other bronchi as we continue on there. Okay? All right. That's beautiful. Just in time for the holidays. All right. So that is kind of getting you set up in terms of what you're expecting to see for the heart dissection. So for you guys, what you want to do is have one person. You don't have to do the dissection yourself, right? If you're into it, it's exciting to you, you want to do it, then go for it. If you're just like, I'm just going to read the list and tell you what you need to find, that's fine too, right? You work in a complementary fashion as a team. For the lab practical, we're not going to ask you to dissect things, but you do need to be able to visibly identify the different parts listed in the table in the lab manual. Okay? So figure out your particular role. Only one person has to do the dissection. The other people can be looking at it, etc. But you got to be full PPE coverage down to the wrist. We've got gloves. There's the bin of fashion with the goggles there. So go ahead and get one out. Get the dissection tools and the trays and start taking a look at it. Very stinky. So, yeah, you can see it's got a lot of flexibility to it, especially when you get to some of the structures like the blood vessels. So even looking here, see, that's really flexible that you see right there. So the unpreserved ones are much more anatomically correct in terms of. And then even you can see the wall here. So we've got to be able to expand. This is that right ventricle. So it's got to be able to open up and then fully collapse in order to eject that blood. So you've got to have that flexibility to it. You know, when you see a heart beating, is actually all these different chambers filling and then collapsing again and again.
The moderator band on it.
There are some, like for instance, even here, this is going to be some. There should be a bigger one as well, like in the sheet, you tend to find it. But that's probably the. So oftentimes in the other ones that we see, the moderator band is much thicker, even with the smaller heart. So this one seems a little bit smaller. There may be additional parts to it that I don't see. The rest of these are chordae tendonated are going up to 80,007. Oh yeah, sure. There. So all of these, you can see how these get regular connective tissue. And then this, that's your AV valve right there. All of that. Right? That's the other one, the one this small here. And these are just anchored along this side. So there's a small individual one this side. For the AV valve, yeah, so it's going to go up here. So this is the atrium up here. It's going to pass down, and the atrium corrects and close its open, if you will, and allow it to go down here. And then it's going to go this way and head out the aorta instead. Right there. So that's that arc. Arc is going to be going around through the base. Yep. Yeah, I know. With some of the different parts that you're dissecting, the way that when they cut them out, a lot of times they're cutting out a lot of the major blood vessels off the base, and sometimes they may even cut it as low as removing some of the atria. But it does give you a very neat view down into the different valves as well as blood vessels. So do what you can with the way that you're receiving it, but sometimes it's actually a boon because you can actually see more interesting things than you thought you would.